Verse 661. Coming means the originating of the objective world as effect, and going is the not seeing of the effect. When one thoroughly understands the coming and going, discrimination ceases. So there's an explanation here of the term coming and going. I suppose it is a phrase which is used quite a lot. And coming up, we've got some verses on birth and death. So coming and going could be understood in the sense of birth and death. And in fact there are several ways we can understand it. But it's quite important, this coming and going, because coming means the originating of the objective world as effect. And this comes in the context of the previous few verses, which were to do with materialism. And this is about giving validity to the idea of an external material world. And the implication of that validity is that we take our cue from it. We take our cue from it. We take our emotional cue from it. And I think most of us experience this directly when we wake up in the morning. We wake up into this so-called objective world, which we take as real, and from the moment that we wake up, it's making demands of us. So in a way it's a bit of a cause, because it affects our mood, or we allow it to. I do these videos in the morning, and I think I would be described as somebody who's definitely not a morning person. And I generally take my emotional cue from the state of my body, which is usually very reluctant to move. And I also take my cue from the state of the small flat that I live in with my wife. It's in a complete state of disarray at the moment, as the front room, as the walls of the main room are being decorated, and there's dust everywhere, and everything's, as much as possible, has had to be taken out of that front room and put into the bedroom and another small room. I think we've been doing quite well. I get quite irritated when I can't find things, but it's been going not too bad. But I could see how this was fueling my mood. When I woke up this morning, there was a difficulty with moving. How swollen is my knee this morning? My knee's been swelling up. How difficult is it to stand up? I have to navigate carefully across the remaining bit of floor space that's visible. So this is the world. This is the world that whatever dream we were having, we've now been thrust into. Although the dream I was having before I woke up was about some old fellow telling me about the historical richness of Australia, which wasn't particularly interesting either. So that dream world is also an objective world, which I'd be taking my cue from. So this is what's meant by coming. The originating of the objective world as effect. It means taking our cue, our emotional cue, from the world. This is materialism. And I could see this happening. I could see how my mood was beginning to plummet shortly after awakening. There were one or two things which I lost by the side of the bed last night, and I decided I wanted to find them before getting on with this video. And I could see that my mood, I was actually fueling the descent towards a particular mood habit pattern. And I almost felt helpless as I witnessed this descent. But I did find one of the things I was looking for. It was my wedding ring. And the other thing that I was looking for actually turned up a short while later when I'd given up looking for it. And then I could get on with preparing myself for this video. And the video, getting myself into this preparation, is spiritual practice. Spiritual practice. There are things I have to do today. I could probably do some tidying up in the front room. Everything's covered in a layer of fine dust. But right now I'm getting on with this video. I'm getting on with looking at this verse. I'm getting on at peeling back the layer of this verse, which is shining a light on the very process I've just been describing of how we use the world to reinforce our particular mood pattern. We use it to reinforce the habit energy of our mood pattern. So this is the significance of this coming. And going is the not seeing of the effect. Well, we could understand this as in the sense of being an automatic, but I would like to see this as actually as part of the dynamic of the spirit of spiritual practice. Going is the not seeing of the effect. In other words, this means when we are not being wagged by the tail, which is this so-called material world. This is when we can turn to pure being, regardless of what the world is doing. Our mood need not be dependent on the world. We are entitled to unalloyed happiness. Now, it's quite a significant time here in this part of the world where I'm living, in the northeast of England, because spring is in the air. The spring festival of Easter is approaching. The days are getting longer. The snowdrops and crocuses have appeared. These are the first flowers to appear in the ground after the sleep of winter. And the daffodils are about to burst out in parks and gardens and countryside. So it's a very nice time, and we're getting a lot of sunshine. Still not very warm, but it's sunshine. It's so easy to take the cue from this as well. It's almost like our bodies are waking up along with the flowers and the increasing sunlight. So we can play that game. We can play that game of being miserable because of such and such, and being happy because of such and such. This is actually what's meant by samsara. It's what's being described here as materialism. I did embark on this winter with the intention of not letting it get me down. And by coincidence, it turned out not to be such a bad winter. It's not been particularly cold. No snow. Now, it might not seem that the world out there is necessarily a big problem, but the world out there also includes our bodies, and our bodies have a life of their own. There are certain things we can do to cooperate with its best interests, perhaps. But by and large, there's very little we can do about our body. It goes on its own merry way, regardless. So again, do we take our cue from the body? And this is a much tougher one, because the physiology of the body affects the mind. The physiology of the body affects the moods. And this is an extremely tough thing to deal with, especially if the physiology of your body is conducive to anxiety and so on. So this is when we have to really deepen our practice. And sometimes you might not be able to practice, and you just have to do what you can to moderate your moods, or to moderate what can sometimes be quite an intense and overwhelming experience. But we keep at it. We keep at it. Observe what's going on. Observe what's going on. Realize that it's a mood. Realize that it's the body. And if you can, tune into this text, tune into this video, even when you don't feel like it. Do it. Do it. Because when one thoroughly understands the coming and going, discrimination ceases. And this discrimination is part of the pattern which reinforces our moods. We are saying, this is why I feel the way I do, or this body is why I feel the way I do. Why do I have such a terrible body? Why can't they figure out what's wrong with me? And so on. This is part of the coming and going. This is discrimination. Now, when you're in this kind of, when you're locked into this kind of dynamic, it's very difficult to see any options or any other possibilities. And it's all very well about me going on about coming back to pure being, or coming back to mind only. Although I described this in the previous verse, I described mind only as happiness itself. And that might be a bit more appealing, a bit more interesting. And previously I described it as the rainbow body. And I mentioned I've been looking at another Mahayana sutra, and this makes reference to the Buddhas of the present, and how you can visit them in their own realms. The most well-known Buddha being Amitabha, or Amitayus, as he's also known, who inhabits the Western paradise known as Sukhavati. Now this may or may not work for you, but it's possible for us to create our own points of reference. And if you're into the Buddhist framework, then there's a very rich landscape that you can begin to inhabit. But if you're a Christian, or if you're into angels, or perhaps you're into the saints, or the prophet, or the gods, you create your own inner world and take your cue from this. You must keep it quite separate though from the everyday world. So if you must take a cue from the world, then let it be only the most wonderful cues. We transform our inner landscape so that we create options for ourselves. We're not just being a martyr to our own suffering. So if you are into the Buddhist way, then we have some very wonderful options, which it might be nice to look at sometime. The point here is we can enter into happiness itself, and if it helps, we can give that happiness form. In Buddhism, one of these forms is the Western paradise, known as Sukhavati, of the Buddha of infinite light, Amitayus. Or we can even create our own Buddha land. So there's no excuse for despair.